"Get your bag out of my bin, or I will have you removed from this aircraft in handcuffs." Those were the first words Debbie Day Sinclair said to Maya Whitfield that she actually meant. Everything before it had just been rehearsal. Maya didn't know that yet. She was still holding a lukewarm cup of airport coffee, still riding the high of a phone call she'd taken 40 minutes earlier at Gate C-14 of Charlotte Douglas International Airport, a call that had ended 6 months of the hardest work of her career. The Riverfront Arts Pavilion in Denver, a 14-acre public commission worth $38. $4 million was hers, her firm's. Whitfield Structural Design, 4 employees, one of them her, had beaten out 4 firms with 100 more people between them. She was 34 years old. She had not slept more than 5 hours a night in a month, and for the first time in her adult life, she had spent $612 upgrading a ticket to first class, because some victories deserve to be felt in the body, not just read in an email. In the inside pocket of her charcoal blazer, wrapped in a fold of tissue paper, sat a small brass compass, dented on one edge, the glass face scratched almost opaque. It had belonged to her grandfather, Elias Whitfield, a structural draftsman who spent 11 years correcting other men's blueprints in Gastonia, North Carolina, and never once got to sign his own name to a finished building. He carried that compass to every job site for 30 years, the way some men carry a Bible. Maya had carried it onto every flight since her first year of graduate school. It was, she liked to say, the only thing on any plane that had earned its seat more than she had. She had no idea it was about to become evidence. Maya's firm had grown out of a converted garage in West Charlotte and a business loan her mother co-signed against a house that was still, technically, not paid off. She remembered her grandfather's stories at the kitchen table, the way his voice would flat and full whenever he talked about the men who reviewed his drawings, then took the credit, then told him, gently, kindly, the way people tell you something cruel while smiling, that clients simply preferred a different kind of face on the presentation slide. He never got bitter about it, not out loud. He just got quieter every year, until the year he died, when Maya was 19, and found the compass in a drawer with a note that said, "For whoever finishes what I couldn't." 6 months of 80-hour weeks later, she had finished something, and she was about to fly home to build it. The gate agent, a young woman named Priya, with a genuine, unhurried smile, scanned Maya's pass at 9:52 that morning. "Welcome aboard, Miss Whitfield. Congratulations on hitting platinum this year." Maya thanked her and walked down the jet bridge feeling, for the first time in a long time, entirely weightless. At the aircraft door stood the senior flight attendant for Meridian Skyways flight 217 to Denver. Her name tag read D. Sinclair. She was 58 years old, with a blonde bob sprayed into a shape that hadn't moved since roughly 2004, and a smile that clicked on and off like a light switch, depending entirely on who was standing in front of her. When Maya stepped through the door, that smile clicked off. Remember that compass. It's going to matter more than you think. Debbie's eyes moved from Maya's face to her rolling suitcase and back, the way a customs officer looks at a passport photo that doesn't quite match. Before Maya could pass the galley, Debbie stepped sideways, blocking the aisle with her whole body. "Main cabin hasn't boarded yet, sweetheart. You'll want to head back out to the gate area." "I'm in first class," Maya said, keeping her voice level. "Seat 2A. "I find that hard to believe," Debbie said, and reached out and took the phone directly from Maya's hand without asking. It is a small thing, a hand closing around your phone without permission. It takes less than 2 seconds. But something in Maya's chest went very still and very cold in exactly that amount of time. The particular stillness of a woman who has done this math before more times than she can count, and already knows there is no version of raising her voice that ends well for her. Debbie stared at the boarding pass, glowing first class, Zone 1, in 18-point font, tapped it once with a manicured nail as if she expected the pixels to rearrange themselves into a lie, and then shoved the phone back into Maya's hand without an apology. Fine, but that bag needs to be checked. Overhead space is limited. The overhead bin at that moment was completely empty. Maya said so. We'll see about that, Debbie said, and finally stepped aside. 3 full minutes before anyone was behind Maya in line. 2 rows up, in seat 1A, a man in a plain charcoal gray sweater was reading a folded newspaper and did not look up. He was 61 years old, with silver hair cut close and the kind of stillness that belonged to men who had spent decades in rooms where other people did the talking. He turned a page. He said nothing. Remember him too. Maya sat down in 2A, closed her eyes, and let herself breathe. 10 minutes later, she felt a hand tap her shoulder, hard enough to make her flinch. Debbie was standing over her, and standing just behind, Debbie was a red mace man in a rumpled suit, holding an overstuffed duffel bag the approximate size of a golden retriever. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remove your bag. Mr. Whitmore needs the space." Maya opened her eyes. "My bag is in the bin above my assigned seat." "There's room across the aisle."
"There isn't,"
Debbie snapped, pointing at bins that were, in fact, already half full of other people's things. "Mr. Whitmore is a diamond member with fragile cargo. You'll need to gate-check yours." Mr. Whitmore's bag, by any visible measure, exceeded the regulation size by a good 6 inches. Maya's own carry-on met every requirement listed on Meridian's own website, a website she had read the night before twice out of the particular habit of a woman who has learned that knowing the rules is the only armor available to her. "I boarded in my correct zone," Maya said. "My bag meets the size requirements. His does not. Why is mine the one being removed?" "Because I said so," Debbie said, dropping any pretense of policy entirely. "And because people like you always think the rules are optional." Mr. Whitmore, to his credit, looked deeply uncomfortable. "It's fine. I can check mine, really." "It is not fine," Debbie interrupted, loud enough now that 6 or 7 heads turned. "Ma'am, you are refusing a direct instruction from a crew member. That is a federal violation." Somewhere behind them, a paper rustled and stopped. Maya reached into her tote, pulled out her phone, and set it face up on the armrest, recording. "I'd like to be clear, on the record. I am seated quietly in my assigned seat. You are threatening to have me removed from a flight I paid for because I won't surrender space I'm entitled to a man whose bag violates your own size policy. Are you recording me?" "Turn that off. You're violating my privacy," Debbie said, her voice climbing into a register the whole cabin could hear now. "I'm documenting a public interaction in a public cabin," Maya said. "That's legal, and you know it." "That's it," Debbie said, drawing herself up. "You're done. You're aggressive. You're hostile. And I don't feel safe. I'm calling the captain." She turned and marched toward the flight deck. Mr. Whitmore grabbed his duffel and fled toward economy without another word, wanting no further part of what he'd started. In seat 1A, the man in the gray sweater took out a plain black phone, typed something in 11 seconds flat, and put it away. He did not look up. He did not need to. He had already seen everything he needed to see, and in 11 seconds, 4 people 2,000 miles away already knew Meridian Flight 217 was about to become a problem. The cabin doors stayed open 11 minutes past scheduled departure. Then the intercom crackled.
"Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Dale Rutherford.
We're addressing a brief security matter in the cabin.
We appreciate your patience."
Maya's stomach dropped through the floor of the aircraft. 2 Charlotte Airport police officers came down the jet bridge 4 minutes later, boots heavy on the fiberglass, radios clicking against their belts. Officer Reyes and Officer Blake. Debbie met them at the galley, one hand pressed to her chest, and began performing terror with the polish of a woman who had clearly done this before. Refused to comply, screaming at me. I felt physically threatened, she said, loud enough to carry. She had not once raised her voice until she chose to be heard. Officer Reyes walked down the aisle and stopped at row 2. "Ma'am, I need you to gather your things and step off the aircraft with us." "I have done nothing," Maya said, her throat tightening despite every effort to keep it from doing so. I sat quietly. "I decline to give up rightful overhead space to a bag that exceeded your own size limits. That is the entire dispute. The crew has determined you're a disruption. The captain has final say on who flies today," Officer Reyes said, and something in his tone had already hardened past the point of negotiation. "We can do this easy, or we do it hard. Either way, you're not making this flight." Somewhere 3 rows back, an older woman in a cardigan spoke up. "She hasn't raised her voice once, officer. I've been watching. That flight attendant provoked this whole thing." A man across the aisle nodded. "She did. I saw it too." Debbie whirled on them. "Stay out of this. You don't know the whole story." "I have the whole story," Maya said quietly, tapping her phone. "Recorded. Every second." Officer Blake stepped forward and unclipped a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The click of the clasp opening was, in that silent cabin, louder than anything Debbie had said in the last 15 minutes. Maya stared at the cuffs and thought, with a strange, sick clarity, about her firm, about the contract that had her name on it as lead architect, about how an arrest record, even a bogus one, even one thrown out in a week, could unravel 6 months of work in a single news cycle. She reached for her seatbelt buckle. Her hands were shaking. "Fine," she whispered.
I'll go.
Debbie's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. It was the expression of a woman who has just won, and who has absolutely no idea what she has actually done. "Excuse me." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every conversation in first class stopped as if someone had cut the power. The man in seat 1A folded his newspaper in half, set it precisely on his tray table, unbuckled his seatbelt, and stood. He stepped into the aisle and placed himself, without hurry, directly between Officer Reyes and Maya's row. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "This woman is not going anywhere." Officer Reyes frowned. "Sir, I need you to sit down. This is police business." The man reached into his sweater and produced a heavy black card with a holographic Meridian logo and held it out. "My name is Gregory Ashworth," he said, his voice never rising above a conversational register. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Skyways. I own this aircraft. I sign that captain's paycheck, and I have been sitting 4 feet from this entire interaction since before boarding began." The silence that followed had a texture to it, the kind of silence where you can hear the ventilation system and nothing else. Officer Reyes turned the card over in his hand, read the embossed title twice, and looked up with the particular pallor of a man, realizing he has just handcuffed the wrong century. "Mr. Ashworth." "I apologize, sir." Dispatch relayed a code from the senior purser about a non-compliant aggressive passenger. "I'm aware of exactly what she relayed," Ashworth said, "because I watched her fabricate it in real time." He turned, finally, and looked at Debbie directly. "The only hostility on this aircraft waft came from my employee." Debbie's face went the color of chalk. "Mr. Ashworth, sir, there's context you're missing." She shoved past me at the door. She refused a safety instruction about baggage. "I watched her board," Ashworth said, each word landing flat and precise, like a hammer set down deliberately instead of swung. "I watched you block her. I watched you take her phone without permission. I watched you demand she surrender rightful space to a bag that violated our own policy, a bag belonging to a white male passenger you decided, based on nothing, deserved the accommodation she had already earned. That is not a misunderstanding, Debbie. That is a pattern, and I intend to find out exactly how long it's been running." Marcus Webb, Meridian's VP of Charlotte Hub Operations, arrived at that exact moment at a dead run, tie loose, breathing hard. He'd been forwarded Ashworth's 11-second text from the terminal next door. "Sir, I came as fast as I." "What's the situation?" "Marcus," Ashworth said, still looking at Debbie. "What is standard protocol for an employee who weaponizes law enforcement against a paying passenger based on her race?" Marcus didn't hesitate. Immediate termination, credential confiscation, removal from company property. "Skip the review," Ashworth said. "Debbie, you're terminated, effective now." "You can't do that," Debbie said, the panic cracking through the composure she'd worn like armor for 28 years. "I have union protection." "You can't fire me on an airplane. I can fire you in the middle of the Atlantic if I choose to," Ashworth said. "Your union rep will receive Ms. Whitfield's recording, along with sworn statements from at least 11 other passengers in this cabin who just watched you do this. Hand your wings and your badge to Marcus now." Here is the frozen moment you'll remember. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The overhead lights seemed to hum louder in the vacuum where Debbie's protests should have been. Somewhere behind row 4, a phone camera's shutter clicked, soft as a held breath, and nobody stopped it. Debbie's hands trembled as she unpinned her wings. She threw them onto the carpet instead of handing them over, then shoved her lanyard into Marcus' chest hard enough to make him step back. "Keep them," she spat. "This is completely illegal." She turned to storm off the aircraft, and Officer Reyes stepped sideways to block her path. "Hold on, ma'am. You initiated a false emergency dispatch to airport police based on a personal grievance. That's a separate matter from your employment. You're coming with us for questioning." "Don't touch me," Debbie shrieked, slapping at Officer Blake's hand as he reached for her wrist, which was, of every possible choice available to her in that moment, the single worst one. Striking a police officer turns a workplace dispute into a criminal one in less time than it takes to say the word. Officer Reyes had her arm behind her back and her face against the bulkhead in 4 seconds flat. The cuffs that had been meant for Maya clicked shut instead around wrists that had, 20 minutes earlier, felt untouchable. Maya sat in seat 2A and watched the woman who had tried to end her career get marched, sobbing, disheveled, and still insisting she was the real victim, down the aisle and off the plane. Relief moved through her chest like something physically loosening. A knot she hadn't fully known was there until it wasn't anymore. Captain Rutherford emerged from the flight deck. Moments later, saw the empty space where his senior purser should have been standing, saw Marcus holding a lanyard, and understood everything before anyone explained it to him.
"Mr. Ashworth."
"I had no idea you were aboard, sir." "Clearly," Ashworth said, "because if you had exercised a single ounce of judgment before locking down this flight deck on the word of one employee, an innocent woman wouldn't have nearly been dragged off in handcuffs for the crime of sitting in her assigned seat." "Sir, protocol dictates I trust my crew's assessment. Protocol dictates you manage your crew," Ashworth said. "Not weaponize the police against a passenger who broke exactly 0 rules. You will apologize to Ms. Whitfield now." Captain Rutherford turned to row 2, and for one long moment looked genuinely, visibly ashamed. "Ms. Whitfield? I failed to protect a passenger on my own aircraft, and I trusted the wrong person to tell me why. I'm deeply sorry." Maya nodded, exhausted down to her bones.
"Thank you, Captain. I just want to get home."
A replacement purser named Colette arrived within 14 minutes, moving through the cabin with the kind of calm competence that made the last 25 minutes feel, briefly, like they belonged to a different flight entirely. The aircraft pushed back at 10:31, 40 minutes late, and lifted off into a gray Carolina sky. Once the seatbelt sign chimed off, Gregory Ashworth moved back to the empty seat beside Maya. "May I?" "Please," she said, and meant it. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "That kind of adrenaline crash can hit hard once the fear wears off." "I'm all right," Maya said. "Better than all right, actually. Thank you. If you hadn't spoken up, I don't know where I'd be right now. You don't need to thank me for basic decency, Ashworth said. What happened to you is a failure of culture, and the culture of this airline starts with me. That's mine to fix. He noticed then the rolled cardboard tube tucked into the side of tote. Blueprints? Maya's exhaustion cracked into something warmer. I'm a structural architect. I just landed the design contract for a new public arts pavilion in Denver. 14 acres, right on the riverfront. Ashworth's eyebrows lifted. The riverfront pavilion. I read about the bid. You beat 4 larger firms for that. 6 months of pitching to get there, Maya said. Sleepless doesn't begin to cover it. He was quiet for a moment, turning something over. Meridian is in the early planning stages of a full terminal rebuild at Denver International. I have spent 3 weeks rejecting proposals from legacy firms because every design they've shown me is safe, expensive, and completely uninspired. I would like your firm to submit for it. Maya stared at him. The Denver terminal project was, in architectural circles, the kind of commission firms spent entire careers chasing and never landing. What had begun as the worst morning of her professional life was, 40 minutes later, turning into its single greatest opportunity. While Ashworth and Maya spoke, 3 separate passengers uploaded their footage. The moment the plane reached cruising altitude and Wi-Fi came online, a tech consultant in row 4 posted the cleanest 3-minute cut with the caption, "Flight attendant tries to get an innocent black woman arrested over a luggage dispute. CEO was sitting 2 rows away and fired her on the spot. Watch to the end." By the time the aircraft crossed Kansas, the clip had 400,000 views. By the time it began its descent into Denver, it had 1 million, and the words Meridian Skyways were the top trending topic in the country. The wheels touched down at 1:47 p.m. Mountain time to a cabin that broke into spontaneous, unified applause, the kind that has nothing to do with a smooth landing and everything to do with what everyone in that cabin had just watched together. Maya's phone, the second she disabled airplane mode, lit up with 214 unread messages and a text from her business partner. "The whole Ernet is watching your flight. Call me." Reporters were waiting at the gate. Maya, who 20 minutes earlier would have given anything to disappear quietly into a rental car, found herself standing in front of 6 microphones instead, and discovered she had something to say. "What happened today was humiliating," she told the cameras, her voice steady. "It's a reality a lot of people who look like me live with regularly. The assumption that we don't belong in the spaces we've paid for, the speed with which our presence becomes a threat. I stayed calm because I've learned I have to. But I was also lucky today. Lucky that someone with power in that room refused to look away. Most people in my position don't get that. I'm not interested in personal charges. I have a building to design for this city, and I refuse to let one bitter woman take my joy from me." Ashworth stepped up beside her. "Meridian Skyways has 0 tolerance for discrimination. The employee involved has been terminated for cause, and effective today, she is permanently banned from flying with us or any partner carrier. We're not stopping there." That last sentence turned out to matter more than anyone in that terminal understood yet. 3 days later, a full internal audit into Debbie Sinclair's employment record surfaced 2 prior complaints, both filed by passengers of color or both on flights out of Charlotte, both flagged in Meridian's internal system and then quietly closed without action, buried under a code marked resolved, no further review. Neither passenger had ever been told what happened to their complaint. One of them, a retired Army colonel named James Petty, was tracked down by a local reporter and said only, "I filed that report 2 years ago. Nobody ever called me back. I stopped expecting them to." The system hadn't failed by accident. It had worked exactly as designed, absorbing complaints quietly enough that no single one of them ever became a pattern anyone had to answer for. Until now. Debbie Sinclair was charged with filing a false police report and interfering with law enforcement after resisting arrest. Without her union's backing, and with a viral recording that left no room for interpretation, she pled guilty. She received an $1,100 fine, 30 months of probation, and a permanent record that closed the door on any future job in hospitality, aviation, or customer-facing work of any kind. Even then, she did not apologize. In a brief statement given outside the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, hair no longer sprayed into place, voice thinner than it had been on the aircraft, she told the one reporter who approached her that she had, quote, been trying to protect the safety of the flight, and that she still believed she had done nothing fundamentally wrong. Her husband, Frank, who had once believed the same thing about her for 22 years of marriage, filed for divorce 6 weeks later. He told a mutual friend, quietly, that he'd finally watched the full video, all 3 minutes and 40 seconds of it, twice, and hadn't been able to look at her the same way since. 6 months passed. The Riverfront Arts Pavilion broke ground in Denver in March, with Maya Whitfield's name on the permit as lead architect, her small firm now with 11 employees instead of 4. Whitfield's structural design was also, by then, 3 months into schematic design on the new Meridian terminal, a contract worth considerably more than the pavilion, one that would carry her firm's name through the airport's arrival hall for the next 50 years. Meridian Skyways instituted what it now called the Dignity Standard, mandatory training for every employee from gate agent to CEO, built directly around the failures of Flight 217, and, once the audit was public, around Colonel Petty's story and one other complaint like his. Attendance was not optional. Ashworth took the training himself, first, before anyone else on the executive floor. He asked that the program not be named after him. "Name it for what it's supposed to protect," he said. "Not for me." On a bright, cold afternoon in November, Maya stood on the unfinished second-floor terrace of the Riverfront Pavilion, hard hat under one arm, watching steel beams rise against a mountain skyline. In the pocket of her work jacket, wrapped in the same worn square of tissue paper, sat her grandfather's brass compass, the one that had written in her tote through every flight of her career and had, 6 months ago, very nearly become the last thing she touched before being led off an airplane in handcuffs. She took it out, turned it once in her palm, the way she always did before signing off on a structural drawing, and slid it back into her pocket without ceremony. Nobody around her noticed. That was the point. Some victories don't need an audience. They just need to be finished. If this story moved something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, either version of yourself, hit like so, this reaches the person who needs to hear it today. Share it with someone who's ever been told, quietly or loudly, that they didn't belong somewhere they'd already earned. And tell me in the comments, honestly, have you ever been in that cabin? Which seat were you in? I read every single answer.